Hi everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. Imagine you're 28 years old. You did everything people told you to do. You stayed out of trouble. You graduated from college. You found a decent job. You work 40 or 50 hours every week. You pay your taxes. You don't expect to become a millionaire. You just want what your parents had. A small house. A stable career. Maybe a family someday. Nothing extravagant. Just an ordinary middle-class life. But then reality starts getting in the way. Every year, home prices climb a little higher. Rent consumes a larger share of your paycheck. Groceries cost noticeably more than they did just a few years ago. Healthcare premiums continue to rise. Student loans refuse to disappear. And just when you finally begin feeling secure in your career, artificial intelligence arrives, and suddenly, people are asking whether your profession will even exist 10 years from now. Then someone says something you've never really considered before. Maybe the problem isn't you. Maybe the problem is capitalism. Would you listen? A growing number of young Americans already are. Not because they've all become socialists, not because they've been reading Karl Marx, but because they're asking a question that previous generations rarely had to ask: is the American dream still within reach? I think that's one of the most important political questions in America today. Not because socialism is suddenly taking over the country, but because millions of ordinary people are beginning to wonder whether the economic system that built the largest middle class in history still works the way it once did. That distinction matters, because if you misunderstand the question, you'll misunderstand the entire debate. Many older Americans hear the word socialism and immediately think about the Soviet Union, government ownership, central planning, the Cold War. But ask many younger Americans what they actually mean, and you'll often hear something completely different. Affordable housing, healthcare that doesn't bankrupt people, college that doesn't leave them paying debt well into middle age, a job that can support a family. In other words, they're not necessarily searching for socialism, they're searching for stability. That's a very different conversation, and it's one worth taking seriously. Because history shows that people rarely abandon a system when life is going well. They start looking elsewhere when they begin losing confidence in the future. Think about what previous generations believed. For decades, there was an unwritten contract in America. Work hard, play by the rules. Maybe life won't be easy, but every year, you'll move a little further ahead. Your children will probably have more opportunities than you did. That belief became known as the American dream. Notice something important. The American dream was never a guarantee. It was a promise of opportunity. It didn't say everyone would become wealthy. It said that effort mattered, that tomorrow could be better than today. Hope, more than anything else, became America's greatest economic advantage. And that's why today's debate isn't really about economics. It's about confidence. Because confidence is difficult to measure. GDP doesn't measure it. Stock prices don't measure it. Corporate profits don't measure it. Yet confidence may be the single most important asset any economy possesses. Consider what's happened over the last 20 years. America has become wealthier. Technology has advanced at breathtaking speed. Artificial intelligence is beginning to reshape entire industries. The stock market has repeatedly reached record highs. Some of the world's most valuable companies are American. By many traditional measurements, capitalism appears to be succeeding. So why do so many young people feel like they're falling behind? That's the contradiction nobody should ignore. Economic success on paper doesn't always feel like economic success in everyday life. Imagine looking at the evening news. You hear that the economy is strong. Then you check your apartment listing and discover your rent has increased another 10%. You hear that productivity has reached another record. Then you wonder whether you can ever afford a down payment on a house. You read that artificial intelligence will create incredible new opportunities. Then you quietly ask yourself whether your own job will still exist. It's possible for all of those things to be true at the same time. And that's exactly why this debate has become so emotionally charged. One side points to impressive economic statistics. The other points to daily experience. Neither side is completely wrong. They're simply looking at different parts of the same picture. Housing illustrates this better than almost anything else. Ask your grandparents what buying their first home was like. Many will tell you it required sacrifice, years of saving, long hours at work. careful budgeting, but they generally believed homeownership was achievable. Today, millions of young Americans aren't questioning whether buying a home will be difficult. They're questioning whether it will ever happen at all. That's a profound psychological shift. Owning a home has never been only about real estate. For generations, it represented something much bigger. Stability, community, a place to raise children, a way to build wealth over time. When people begin believing that milestone is moving permanently out of reach, they don't just lose confidence in the housing market. They begin losing confidence in the future itself. And that's when politics starts changing. Not because people suddenly become more ideological, but because uncertainty makes every alternative sound more attractive than it once did. That's where today's conversation about capitalism often goes off the rails. Some people insist capitalism is failing. Others insist capitalism has never been stronger. The truth is probably more complicated than either slogan. Capitalism has created extraordinary prosperity. That isn't really debatable. No other economic system has generated as much innovation, technological progress, or long-term growth. But success creates its own challenges. An economy can produce enormous wealth while making that wealth feel increasingly difficult to reach for younger generations. That's the conversation America should be having. Not whether capitalism is good or bad, but whether it is still producing enough opportunity to keep the American dream alive. The answer, I believe, depends on understanding something that both the political left and the political right often overlook. People rarely support a different economic system because they spend years studying economic theory. They support it because they're trying to solve problems they experience in everyday life. That's an important distinction. Very few 25-year-olds wake up wondering whether Friedrich Hayek or Karl Marx had the better understanding of markets. They're wondering why they need 2 jobs just to pay rent. They're wondering whether they'll ever own a home. They're wondering if having children is becoming a financial luxury instead of a normal part of life. Those aren't ideological questions. They're practical ones, and practical questions deserve practical answers. This is why I think the phrase "the rise of socialism" is actually a little misleading. Most young Americans aren't demanding that the government own every business. They're not calling for Washington to run every factory or eliminate private enterprise. What they're really saying is much simpler. We don't feel secure anymore. That's a very different message. Security has become one of the defining political issues of our time. Economic security, housing security, job security, even technological security, and perhaps nowhere is that anxiety more visible than in the housing market. Housing isn't just another consumer product. It's the foundation upon which people build almost every major life decision. People delay marriage because they can't afford housing. They postpone having children because they can't afford housing. They move farther away from their families because they can't afford housing. Eventually, housing stops being an economic issue and becomes a social issue. It's no coincidence that countries facing severe housing shortages often experience declining birth rates, increasing political polarization, and growing frustration among younger generations. When a society struggles to provide the basic conditions for building a stable middle-class life, confidence naturally begins to erode. And confidence, once lost, is incredibly difficult to restore. This is one reason I think many political debates miss the point. Some politicians promise to freeze rents. Others promise to tax billionaires. Still others insist that the free market will solve everything if government simply gets out of the way. Reality is rarely that simple. Take rent control, for example. It sounds compassionate, and in the short term, it can certainly help some tenants. But if developers stop building because future returns become less attractive, the housing shortage often becomes even worse. On the other hand, simply saying, "let the market handle it," isn't enough either. Markets can't build homes if local governments make construction nearly impossible. Restrictive zoning laws, years of underbuilding, complicated permitting processes, and local political resistance have all contributed to today's housing shortage. This isn't a problem with one single cause, which means it probably won't have one simple solution. The same is true of wealth inequality. It's easy to point at billionaires and argue that they should simply pay more taxes. Sometimes there are legitimate debates about tax policy. But even if every billionaire paid significantly higher taxes tomorrow, America would still face many of the same structural problems. Housing would still be scarce. Healthcare would still be expensive. Artificial intelligence would still be changing the labor market. That's why focusing only on redistribution often misses the larger challenge. The question isn't simply how we divide today's wealth. It's how we create tomorrow's opportunities. And that's where I think capitalism still has an enormous advantage. Not because it's perfect, but because it has something many people forget: it knows how to evolve. The capitalism Americans experience today isn't the same system their great-grandparents experienced. At the beginning of the 20th century, there was no Social Security, no Medicare, few workplace protections, minimal financial regulation. The Great Depression forced America to rethink how markets should operate. Franklin Roosevelt didn't abolish capitalism. He modernized it. After World War II, new investments in highways, education, scientific research, and home ownership helped create one of the largest middle classes the world had ever seen. Each generation inherited a system that looked a little different from the one before it, not because capitalism had failed, but because successful systems survive by adapting to new realities. That may be the most important lesson history offers us. The greatest threat to capitalism has never been socialism alone. The greatest threat has always been complacency. Whenever people assume that a successful system no longer needs reform, they begin ignoring the warning signs that are quietly accumulating beneath the surface. And today, there are new warning signs that previous generations never had to confront. Artificial intelligence may become the biggest one. For the first time in modern history, technology isn't just replacing routine manual labor. It's beginning to perform cognitive work: writing, programming, graphic design, legal research, financial analysis, even parts of medicine. No one knows exactly how this transition will unfold. New jobs will almost certainly emerge. History suggests they always do. But transitions are rarely painless, and people don't vote based on what economists believe will happen 20 years from now. They vote based on how secure they feel today. That's why AI could reshape politics just as much as it reshapes the economy. If millions of people begin feeling that technological progress benefits only a small number of companies while leaving everyone else more uncertain, political pressure for dramatic economic change will continue to grow. Not because Americans suddenly stopped believing in free enterprise, but because they stopped believing free enterprise was creating enough opportunity for ordinary people. That's a very different problem. And, fortunately, it's one that can still be solved. Thanks for watching.